Dungeons & Dragons has a choice problem, especially when it comes to character creation. We've all had the experience of sitting down to a tabletop RPG for the first time with our character sheet and the player's handbook laid out in front of us, eager to create a fictional character and roll dice with our friends, only to be buried under a deluge of ancestries, classes, character abilities, and backgrounds. Character creation in something like D&D often involves many pages of text, cross-referencing stats, bonuses, and abilities from multiple places in the player's handbook. Spellcasters have it even worse, having to cross-reference stats with charts to see how many spells they can cast, and choose from a long list of dozens of different spells. But let's face it, the problems with spellcasters could fill their own video. The choice problem isn't unique to RPGs either. Any avid board gamer is familiar with the phrase analysis paralysis, where a player can be so overwhelmed with the choices available to them that they sit locked in internal debate, unable to chart a path forward. Even restaurants struggle with this in the form of the menu problem, where prospective patrons sift through the menu, reading the same passages over and over again as they attempt to decide what exactly it is they want to eat. We've all had the experience of browsing through Netflix for an hour only to not pick anything to watch, or through our Steam libraries full of entirely too many games. Constraints, while disappointing, help define the scope of the problem and thus aid us in reaching a decision faster. Stand around with a group of friends and ask, where should we go for lunch? And you'll be stuck debating every restaurant in town. But ask, we going to Chipotle or Chick-fil-A? And you're going to get an answer much faster. So how do we fix this problem? We want choices, especially in a tabletop RPG. The whole fantasy of Dungeons & Dragons is being able to escape to another world with your friends and embody a character going on adventures that you never could. Each person has a different idea of that fantasy, from a roguish and charming swashbuckler to a devout and chaste paladin to a sinister and scheming necromancer. The added customization options don't just fuel our imaginations, they provide us with incentives for replayability. Maybe you spent the last 5 adventures as a sneak thief, but you want to give that axe-wielding barbarian a go this time around. But we also don't want to sit with an infinite list of choices in front of us. D&D is designed to be little more than a framework for our imaginations, providing the boundaries of a sandbox to play in. It lets us do anything we can imagine, but within a system of predetermined options, stats, and dice rolls to produce those results. The developers are, somewhat ironically, limiting choice from the infinite to the finite in order to facilitate play, only to wind up with the same problem during character creation. As designers, we need to square this obstacle to find an intersection point that facilitates customization for varied play while limiting choice to the player so they aren't overwhelmed when sitting down to create a character. And thankfully for us, an RTS already solved this problem nearly 20 years ago. Empire's Dawn of the Modern World is an RTS developed in 2003 by Big Huge Studios and designed in part by veteran RTS designer Rick Goodman. Rick was one of the founders of Ensemble Studios and one of the original designers of Age of Empires, and he seemed to be struggling with this same problem throughout his career. The original Age of Empires was released in 1997, and we're all pretty familiar with that civilization-esque style of picking which nation to play. There's a list of available options, each of which play largely the same, but feature a few unique bonuses to influence playstyle. The English get better bowmen, Spain gets conquistadors, and the French get French things. This system, while basic, works pretty well. A player has a fundamental understanding of how each nation works, but is free to experiment around the edges with the bonuses provided. A player is still going to be gathering wood, planting farms, wolo-woloing across the map, but the bonuses of a unique nation might force them into using archers more than they normally would, or giving greater attention to typically ignored sea units. It seems our good friend Rick wasn't satisfied with this system, however, as he completely changed it when breaking off to make Empire Earth in 2001. Empire Earth has an honestly bonkers system for an RTS, more akin to tabletop wargaming than video games. In Empire Earth's skirmish mode, you don't pick a nation. The game just starts and drops a player in with nothing more than a flashing crown icon. Clicking on this icon brings up a menu with every possible bonus a player could have and a corresponding cost and points. Both players get 100 points to spend however they wish on the available bonuses. Essentially, each player is able to custom build their own nation from a standardized list of abilities. Sound familiar? This system has some pretty obvious drawbacks. For one, it's very odd to me that this menu would be presented in-game to the player rather than before the start of the match. And second, it requires a pretty thorough understanding of how an RTS even works in order to pick bonuses. An experienced player may look at the feudal setting and put all of their bonuses into swordsmen or archers, not realizing that these units will become obsolete as the epochs in the game progresses. A more experienced player is more likely to sink the points into things like the gathering rate of their villagers or decreasing the cost of buildings or upgrades. So like all good designers, they kept experimenting with it. Empire Earth 2, released in 2005, returns to the more conventional Age of Empires style with one noticeable addition. In Empire Earth 2, there are actually 3 bonuses that each nation gets, 1 unique to that nation and 2 shared according to region. So Western nations like England and Germany have 1 unique bonus each, but share 2 Western region bonuses. China and Japan do the same, but instead share Eastern region bonuses, for example. This eases the burden on the prospective player by giving them less options to look at, while still providing enhanced customization. There are 16 individual nations and 4 regions in Empire Earth 2, meaning a player only has to sift through 16 individual bonuses and 4 grouped bonuses to make a choice. Further, the grouping helps to narrow choices for them. If a player really likes the Western region bonuses, for example, then they are going to pick between the 5 Western civilizations, narrowing their choices considerably from 16 to 5. This may sound like a lot of choices still, but compare that to something like Civ 5, where if you include the DLC, has 43 possible civilizations to play as, each of which has wholly unique features that the player has to sift through. This results in a new player taking one of 2 routes. Either they spend an eternity to look through every option and pick the one they think will best gel with their playstyle, or they simply pick a nation that feels the most familiar and hopes for the best. There's a reason America is always the first Civ I play as in a new Civ game. However, our good friend Rick wasn't satisfied with that approach. While Mad Dog Software went in a more conventional direction with Empire Earth 2, Rick Goodman and Stainless Steel Studios took a more novel approach. And that finally leads us to Empire's Dawn of the Modern World. Released in 2003, 2 years before Empire Earth 2, Empire's Dawn of the Modern World has one of the clumsiest names I've seen for an RTS, and it also has one of the most interesting nation-picking systems I've ever come across in the genre. In Empires, a player is able to choose between just 4 nations when starting a match: China, England, the Franks, and Korea. Play resembles that of any other conventional RTS as a player advances their nation through 5 epochs, from the Middle Ages to World War II. Where it gets really interesting is the transition from the Imperial Age, the game's 3rd epoch, to World War I, the game's 4th. This comes at a stage in the match where the player has built up their nation, got their economy humming, researched a few technologies, and is ready to drive towards the endgame. And it's where Empires presents the player with their most interesting choice. See, in Empire's Dawn of the Modern World, there aren't actually 4 nations, there are 9. 4 in the early game and 5 in the late game, with the additions of Russia, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and the United States. Each of the original 4 nations can evolve into 2 of the game's 5 advanced nations, except for England, which gets to choose between 3 for some reason. These aren't just a cosmetic upgrade. Each of these nations has radically different bonuses, special units, and abilities than the 4 earlier nations and can alter gameplay substantially. To give one example, England has special buildings only they can construct, one of which continuously provides food and the other gold or stone, without needing villagers to collect them. Upgrade to any other nation and that ability goes away, forcing the player to build farms or mine conventionally if they want to keep their economy growing. This system is brilliant. It provides a limited choice early on, while providing additional options for customizations later. See where I'm going with this? It isn't perfect, unfortunately. For one, the game doesn't actually tell you what a nation's bonuses are, both when you're picking an early game nation and, more importantly, when you're picking a new one in the middle of a match. This was perhaps less of a problem in an era where game manuals were standard, but it's downright criminal in the current digital age. I also think the system as designed is a little limited. There's only 2 points of choice, one before the match has started and another about halfway through. I would prefer to see a system in which the changes were more gradual, but happened once per age rather than once per game, similar to Age of Mythology's system. In Age of Mythology, the player starts the game by selecting a unique god, analogous to a nation in that game. The gods are grouped together in similar mythologies as if echoing the region system of Empire Earth 2. In-game, every time the player advances to a new age, they have to choose between one of two lesser gods, each which confers special units and bonuses. In effect, Age of Mythology's system sits at a halfway point between more conventional systems like Age of Empires and that of Empire's Dawn of the Modern World. Personally, I'd like to see Empires borrow from this and take it a step further, where a player is given a choice of how to advance their nation each time they reach a new era. Instead of using Age of Mythology's system of granting a new power and unit, it would continue in the Empire's tradition of changing the nation the player controls, with converging and diverging trees among the nations. For example, the game starts with a basic civ like Celts or Romans who have a simple unique bonus. In the following age, the Celts have the option of becoming the English, Franks, or Germans, each option layering on another unique bonus, while the Romans have the option of becoming the Franks, Germans, or Byzantines. Or you have Babylonians, who can become Arabs, Persians, or Indians. As the ages progress, the nation's tree would diverge further and further, building up a more unique nation over time. This gives the player all of the freedom of Empire Earth's list of abilities, but introduces it organically as play progresses, rather than bombarding the player with it all at once. So what the heck does this have to do with Dungeons & Dragons? Well, D&D has the same problem, only it's not with nations, it's with classes. Dungeons & Dragons, if we only count the 5th edition Player's Handbook, has 12 classes, each with their own playstyle, combat utility, and abilities. In character creation, this is on top of rolling 7 stats, choosing from the game's 9 ancestries, each of which has their own unique traits and stat alterations, subclass specialties, optional personalities, backgrounds, feats, equipment, and the game's 18 skills. You would need a mathematician to figure out the starting totals possible of a D&D character, or Google. Synergenesis on Reddit calculated at over 7 trillion, link to their post in the description. That's a lot of choice, maybe even too much choice. Not for veteran players, mind you, those who know the game and have been through the character creation ringer a half dozen times. Those players get all the customization they can dream of. It's new players who pay the price. Character creation in Dungeons & Dragons, in my opinion, takes entirely too long, and this is largely the reason why. There is so much thrown at the players so early with so many decisions to make before they've even played the game. Thus, they have to make the largest number of decisions at the point they're least equipped to do so. I don't know about you, but that strikes me as bad design, or at least well-intentioned design that got lost somewhere along the way. For me, if character creation in a TTRPG takes longer than 15 minutes, you've hecked up. Character creation needs to either be simple enough that a player can do it on their own without help, or for players to be able to create their characters at the table and be up and running in a matter of minutes. This is just a mechanical perspective. In the real world, players are going to have side conversations or will spend time asking the DM various questions about their world. While these questions can add to our imaginary character creation clock, they're ultimately a good thing. They show that the player is getting invested in the world, and so don't really matter for our purposes. I'm talking about the time it takes for an experienced DM to lead a group of new players through the mechanical act of character creation. About the time it takes for players to pick over ancestries, what bonuses they get, and what class to pick. If that takes more than 15 minutes, the design is too complicated or too cumbersome and needs to be reworked. The ideal scenario is for a group of friends to be over at someone's house, to see the D&D books on a shelf and say, "Oh, you play D&D? I always wanted to try that." 30 minutes after that moment, the player should be sitting around the table, characters created, and actively playing the game. What we need is a system with less choice at the beginning of the experience to lower the barrier of entry without sacrificing the depth of the game overall. We need something that allows a player to quickly figure out if they want to be a warrior or a mage up front, while allowing for specialties such as bards and paladins down the line. This is in some way similar to the idea of prestige or advanced classes in the existing game, but where those add complexity by requiring various levels in certain classes and give the player even more research to do, this would lessen the choices and thus the burden on the prospective player. I'm sure if you've made it this far, you've already come up with some of your own ideas of how such a system could be implemented. But for fun, I decided to sketch out an idea of how this could be put into place with D&D's existing classes. Additionally, if you know about a system that already works this way, please post it in the comments below. I'd be really interested to check it out. Alright, so how would I go about this? Well, the current system offers a lot of upfront choice, but the differences in playstyle are actually pretty minimal. Again, this is smart design. This is the designers attempting to onboard the characters into their new chosen class. However, the real changes don't start until around level 3, so let's build a system that leverages that as an advantage. We also need to build a system that allows for some customization up front. Not everyone is going to want to play a level 0 villager that is identical to everyone else. So let's start with 4 classes that most encapsulate the tropes players would be familiar with. A fighter, a mage, a healer, and a rogue. That covers the basic archetypes without getting too complicated too quickly. It allows a player to customize their approach early on into the type of character they want to play as without getting bogged down in a long list of choices. These 4 choices give us a solid foundation to work from and help reduce the clutter from overlapping classes, such as spellcasters that can look identical to new players. Now there is a potential lore issue as spellcasters in D&D have different origins, so we may need a title that can apply to wizards, warlocks, and sorcerers equally, something like Acolyte or Adept that could apply both to a wizard in training or a warlock praying to their dark patron. This would identify the player as someone with a proclivity for magic, but let them decide where that magic comes from with a later upgrade. The players would maintain these basic classes through level 3, giving them ample time to get used to their playstyle, learn how the game works, and give them an idea of the kind of abilities they want to get as the game progresses. Just like in the current game, lower level players would only have access to a few abilities, acting as an extended tutorial for the wider experience. Then, at level 4, players would choose a more advanced class branching off from the original 4 classes. Just like Empire Dawn of the Modern World, will present the player with several choices of what to upgrade into. Our generic fighter can become a paladin, mixing fighting with some magic, a warrior to continue on the fighter path, or a monk to move into stealthier or dex-based combat. Each of those 4th level classes would continue to 8th level, where we would present additional choices to the player. Our paladin could become a death knight to wield dark power, a templar to carry forth the traditions of the paladin, or a hospitaller to spec towards healing. Our warrior could become a fancy cavalier, a raging barbarian, or a versatile battle master. So on and so forth, branching again at 12th level and 16th level. You will notice from these images on screen that these ideas are not fully fleshed out. I have enough jobs as it is, and so unfortunately do not have the time to build this into a proper system. Rather, it is meant to be considered a design sketch to present the idea. You'll also notice I've taken liberties with some class names and spells or abilities that would need to be rebalanced to fit their new level requirements. In addition to this, certain class names are replicated in different places, allowing multiple paths to different classes. This also provides the ability to fold certain classes back into the mainline paths later, eliminating the need for every variant to have a unique evolution all the way to level 20. These pathways allow for a party to change their composition as a campaign progresses, allowing them to further tailor their characters to the campaign being run. Furthermore, it eliminates much of the need for multi-classing, as a player can organically build toward the character they want over time, rather than having to take multiple lower classes they don't want in order to get the same effect. Initially, this may seem more complicated than the current system. After all, it necessitates a diagram to understand, but the actual bookkeeping would be greatly diminished. Levels in multiple classes would no longer be needed, and spells, abilities, and feats can be more specific to the relevant classes, rather than the deluge of options players are currently met with every time they level up. And finally, it would greatly speed up the act of character creation. By presenting the player with a limited set of choices, at specific times, they aren't overwhelmed with too many options. They have clear, distinct choices to make and information available to make them. If you're playing D&D, you can likely figure out the difference between a fighter, thief, or mage, even if you've never played the game before. But good luck guessing the difference between a warlock, wizard, or sorcerer without any additional information. This system, while requiring admittedly a lot of work from the designers, gives players the best of both worlds. It allows them to make snappy, informed decisions, while also letting them explore the game at their own pace and customize a character to their liking. So that's it, that's the video. Just an idea I wanted to explore and share with the wider world. While a fun design exercise, this also shows us that design is not simply limited to one domain. Though Empire's Dawn of the Modern World and Dungeons & Dragons are both games and in industries that frequently borrow from one another, it reminds us that we can draw inspiration from far and wide to fix problems in our own backyard. If you liked this video and would like to support the channel, you can do so over at Patreon or by buying my short stories on Google Play. My latest short story is the first in the Recon and Recovery series titled Mary Had a Golden Lamb. It's a pulpy sci-fi adventure inspired by things like Stargate SG-1, where an elite government agency needs to steal a sheep from a medieval monastery. If that sounds like your thing, you can purchase it on Google Play for only $2. I like to think of my short stories as narrative candy bars or an afternoon snack by way of writing. It's an excuse to take a 10-minute break to help get you through the day. Links in the description. Every bit of support helps the channel grow and buy better equipment like the new microphone and teleprompter I am using for this video, neither of which were cheap. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. I need to catch my breath. This is not going to work. But then, okay, this is getting all f***ed up. Can be more specified? Encapsulate the tropes, or a hospitaller to... You want to come here, cat? Come here, come here. Come here. Behold, it is Cat. Hello, kitty cat. I know, it's so bright in here. Alright, you go around and play. No purring. Purring's gonna mess up the audio. Alright, we're just gonna do a quick test. Quick test. Quick test. I'm gonna take this off, because it's going to get very warm.